name is Mike Worden, and I went to St. Maria Goretti in Long Beach, grade school, and then I went to St. John Bosco, and I graduated from St. John Bosco in 1972, and then I had some opportunities at various colleges because of the great teaching and coaching and education that I got at Bosco. And I chose to go to the Air Force Academy. So I went to the Air Force Academy and graduated from there in 1976 and went on from there and went in a fabulous Air Force career for 33 years and retired from the Air Force, and of course got hired by Lockheed Martin as an executive for about 5 or 6 years. I left Lockheed because I wanted to leave Lockheed, start a business of my own. I did try to start a business on my own 2 years, and it was a pretty big business, and we just couldn't raise the money I needed to do a test flight of a vehicle that we were inventing. And then I had a private consulting business and was doing defense and non-defense related items. And then I got appealed to by the mayor of Seattle to come help her with a traffic problem. And I did that for a year, and then decided to retire and catch up with my family and a lot of ailing relatives. And so since then, which was last year, COVID hit, and then I've been ever since helping my parents and my relatives in Montana. I've been helping my kids who have farms in Washington State and staying busy. My wife runs a bed and breakfast, and I am now finally unemployed, but very busy still. So I survived.
So it's obviously been a very long journey for you, and with starting back in Bellflower, California,
right?
And you, like you said, you transferred from Goretti and you went to St. John Bosco, where you played 2 sports,
right?
My understanding.
Yeah, I played football and I played baseball, and I want to pull one person from St. Maria Goretti with me. It was the first guy I kind of met because my dad was in the Air Force, and we came to LA when I was in the 7th grade, and we came, and he and my mother had to start working, and they both started working so that I could go to Catholic school. And I met a good friend there. His name is Rich Ritchie, and he became a good friend, and we both decided to go to Bosco. We got inadvertently recruited by the principal, Father Carmen Vira. Said the right things to my parents, which was get a good education, get some discipline, and then go from there and make sure that Mike is challenged, and they did that in spades. So I went along with Rich, and I'm going to pull Rich into the quick story and then kind of eject him out of the whole story. But Rich and I happened to go there. He didn't play baseball like I did, but he played football and he wrestled, and he was an all-league offensive tackle. He was a very good tackle and very intelligent guy. And he's the guy that talked me into going to the Air Force Academy, because he was dedicated to go and determined to go. And he was a close friend all the way back from 7th grade. So we both ended up going to the Air Force Academy. Both were roommates the first year, which was the only 2 roommates that knew each other in high school were allowed to be even close to each other. And that's because the head coach at Air Force Academy pulled strings, so I wouldn't leave and he wouldn't leave. So we went through it together, and we became very close. We graduated together. We were in different squadrons by the time we were seniors. And then he ended up going to, we both went to pilot training together in Texas. And then we both went to fighter lead-in training together in New Mexico. And then I went to Phoenix for jet training, and he went to Tucson, Arizona for jet training. He became an A-10 pilot. I became an F-4 pilot at the time, and we both finished at the top of our class. And we had a big graduation event with live missiles, live bombs, and we were fighting against the National Guard in a big air war over the deserts of Arizona, Gila Bend bombing range, and I was the mission leader as a brand new second lieutenant, the top student, and he was a top student from Tucson, and we flew, and he went into strafe with his A-10, a column of tanks out there in the desert, and he had a good strafe run. I was overhead for fighting air patrol and the dog fighting overhead. I looked down when he called in on his attack, and I watched him come off the target that was exploding and everything else, and he caught his left wingtip on a ridgetop, cartwheeled in, blew up.
Oh.
And I was 22, maybe 22 and a half. He was the same age as I was. And he had gotten married after the academy. I was the best man in his wedding, or I was in his wedding. And and I would go and drive from Phoenix down to Tucson to spend the weekends with he and his wife, who was his high school sweetheart. And so I was the young, at 22 and a half, I got an accelerated life that the military was introducing to me, and I had to go break the news to Sarah Slaby, which was a very good friend of mine, and his wife, the news. So tell them that my best friend and her husband had just died in an accident, aircraft accident. So that was a very early maturing event at 22 and a half. But it brought back memories of what we learned and what we went through together, and the character building that went on, not only with sports, but the academics and the discipline of a Catholic school. It helped me on that day, and it helped Sarah on that day, because Sarah knew who she was dating at Bosco and what that school was about. And she knew, as she was going through the Air Force too and all that jet training, the rigors and the demands and the high achievement levels for 21-year-olds. And so it helped. Those Bosco years did not have an insignificant role in giving us the spine and the maturity, probably in advance of our years, to get through that situation with great dignity. I also broke the news to help break the news to his mother back in LA. Went out and got her, picked her up, and her sister, and we all went up to Colorado Springs to bury Rich, who had just graduated from there about less than 2 years ago. So
were you thinking about, thank you for sharing that. I mean, were you thinking about, after that happened, did you ever think, what am I doing here? Like, I can't do this. I just saw my best friend get killed. Did you think about, is this right for me? Haven't seen that?
Yeah, no, I to be honest with you, I was into it. I was in the zone. I mean, and I learned that, I think, in high school when we went back there, and Coach Bassick put us through the grinders and all these other unbelievable, and it was smog back then in LA, and we just worked harder and had higher levels of expectations. And when we reached that level, he'd always inch the bar up. He wouldn't yank it up, he would inch it up. And it was a special chemistry at that place to try to get the most out of each student's potential, both physical education. I won't say social so much, because we were an all boys Catholic school.
Right.
And there was little time for girls, at least in my life. But somehow Rich lucked into Sarah, who was I think a cheerleader at our sister school. But anyway, I thought I would bring the Rich Ritchie chapter in there, just to draw it back to St. John Bosco, and draw it back to the expectations and the sometimes driving you, sometimes luring you to your peak in terms of performance, academically, athletically. There was just high standards, and they really cared. And so I grew up a lot at Bosco, and of course that helped both Rich and I be at the top of our class, not only at the academy, but at the basic pilot training, then advanced pilot training, and then fighter lead-in training, and then in our our two weapon systems, like mine F4s at the time, and his NEA-10s, and so we were highly competitors. We were highly competitive. We were, and it was in our DNA. And so, yes, it was hard at 22 and a half, but I did not shake at all that I was amongst elites, and we were hyper competitive, and I loved it. I thrived on it. And even if it took my best friend very quick, it made me even more determined to succeed and follow the good mentors that I was getting. Most of them were Vietnam veterans, hard chiseled 3 tours in Vietnam, maybe shot down a MiG or two, and were pretty bitter about ironically, about how that one ended. So no, it didn't shake. It shook me up emotionally, but I never wavered in terms of meeting challenges.
Thinking, and so Catholic school education. I didn't go to a Catholic school,
Yeah.
but from what I hear, with a Catholic school education, you know, there was, I guess there were like financial troubles, or a lot of Catholic schools had financial troubles. I mean, what are the things that you touched on it, but what are those things that really make a Catholic school education, um, unique? And part two of this question is your arch rival, Mater Day,
Mm-hmm.
when you were playing. What was the difference between those two schools?
Well, I can't speak to the latter because I didn't go to them, right? But I can speak, in Catholic schools, there are different orders, right? Different orders or sects, I guess you could call them. There's the Jesuits, there's the Salesians, there's the Dominicans, there's all sorts of different nunneries and brotherhoods, I call it, the brothers. So we had at Bosco Salesians, and Salesians are known in the Catholic world for being very um, to having a lot of courage to go into third world countries where they're not protected and try to spread the faith, right? So there's a lot of courage in them. They take great pride in educating themselves and in building, I'll say, moral courage, physical courage. Jesuits are big disciplinarians, and
Okay.
they all have their own, I guess, reputation. We had Salesians, and so they were really, like I said, into educating us and challenging us academically, and also in terms of building moral first principle behaviors and courage, right? So that you got that when you're in the academic classroom, and of course they're also on the sidelines during the games and stuff like that, leading by example, mentoring young men, etc. So the academic side was challenging. I had no problem with the ACT or the SAT tests, and I didn't take it back then. I didn't take it twice. I just took it the first time and got high scores. So I'd have to worry about it, and as a result, and I was a student athlete. As a result, I got all sorts of offers from baseball and from football, and so my down select was which ones are the good school. I got recruited by Notre Dame. I got recruited by Stanford. So I wanted to make sure I had a good education in case I got hurt, right?
Right.
Or in case I didn't compete. So I was very reasoned in terms of managing the odds
Right.
and saying that not many people make it to the pros, not many
I
people.
was going to ask you, like, did you think about, sorry to cut you off, but did you
Yeah.
think about that in your decision making?
Yes. Yeah, I was very pragmatic about it. Yeah, I got offered by Milwaukee Brewers to play baseball. I got all those big name universities, but I self-selected after going through that school, and of course having a great dad who was a finance officer in the Air Force. Um, and a big member of the booster club, which we'll touch back on. How did they pay for us? And my parents both. My mother started working; they both worked, so I could go through. And then I have a brother 3 years behind me and when I was a senior, he was a freshman. They just busted their butts. My dad was a major and then a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, and so they worked to pay for us. And then for those of us that couldn't afford it, there was a huge booster club that was out fundraising all the time for not only for their own kids, but for the programs there. So it was really a family atmosphere. We even had a carnival, an annual carnival on campus in a thickly populated part of the Los Angeles basin to raise money for basketball, for football, for better books, for, so it was a self-help big family. And my parents, who's still alive, they're 80, almost 90 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they still um, send Christmas cards, etc. They're living in Montana now, but they still send Christmas cards to LA. And when I came back for the Legends of Bosco ceremony, I think it was 2001 or something, and with the school gave me a great honor, and Bellflower gave me the key city and all this other stuff. I was, I think, a one star at the time. We came back, and my parents came with me, and there was more celebration of seeing my parents amongst the booster clubs that were still there generations back. And me, now that was in 90, so my parents weren't 89, they're 89 now. So I mean, that's about 10 years ago. So they were like in their high 70s. They went back and they hadn't lost track. I mean, the tables they had there, they were surrounded by old booster club colleagues of them. So there's this family alumni togetherness that you get when you band together to be able to pay for the school, to be able to raise money so you can buy more. It's like it's your own business, right? A private business that you're trying to, a family business coming together. So there was something special there. It wasn't as detached as some of my friends from Goretti that went to public schools were. So it was a little different, smaller. We were smaller in the teams we played. I can get into that a little bit later about some of the playoff games, and
Was
we have more, but it was a special place. I'm trying to characterize what was special about going to a private school that was small with high expectations and then competing against schools that were much, much larger than us.
So Mater Dei in those days, I was just reading that Mater Dei and St. John Bosco are like right in the top of the high school football polls. And in those days, when you were playing, was that your arch rival at that point, or was there another school that you also competed
Yeah, I
with?
think since you're going way back with me, it's the early days, graduating in 72. Modern Day was not in our league at the time.
Okay.
So um, we were more focused on the toughest team in our league, which I think was Cantwell. I think it was Cantwell. And but we came out early in the season in my senior year, ranked number 7 or something like that.
Okay.
And then we had an early game against the number 2 ranked team or something like that, and we just blew them away. So we shot up pretty quick, but we weren't entering the season as number 1 like 1 and 2 like Bosco and Mater Dei have been for the last several years. It was a different arrangement then. So no, Mater Dei wasn't our chief rival. Our chief rival was to make sure that we won the league, and then we take on all comers.
So you were actually, my understanding, if I bounce around a little bit, I apologize, but
No problem.
you were supposed to play in the 605 game,
Yeah, yeah.
and you couldn't.
Well, I signed up for it first, and Coach Masick was selected to coach it, and we had a lot of guys from my school that were on the team, like Don Mervin, who broke all the records as a wide receiver, and Danny Bridges, who was all CI, all California too, and of course I would love to play another game for Coach Masick. We had such a great time together, and but I decided at that time, because if you're going to Notre Dame, or you're going to Stanford, or you're going to, Nebraska, or whoever else the big teams were back then, you didn't have to really kind of make your mind up until you had to show up for practice in August, right?
Right.
But if you're going to a military academy, and I got recruited by Army, Navy, and Air Force, and I visited all the campuses, I had to make my mind up
Right.
in June, early June, because they were starting up with that summer indoctrination training, which was basically they called it well, basic cadet training, but it was pretty much hell for 3 months, and it was boot camp basically. And so I had to make my mind up that if I was going to academy, I had to commit. And so I committed to go to the Air Force Academy along with Rich Ritchie. And that means I had to bow out, much to Coach Massick's disappointment, but he understood. And so I had to leave before that game could be played. So I pulled out of it.
That was an all-star game.
Yeah, it was an
6-on-5.
all-star game in the LA basin, basically.
Okay. So you were off the Air Force. Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, um, before we get to Air Force, who were can you recall some of the players that you played with
Oh, yeah.
in high school
Yeah.
that went on or?
Yeah. So when I was a junior, I was a defensive back.
Okay.
And that at the end of the junior year, I was working hard and I was starting to grow. Everybody grows at different rates, right? So I was a pretty good defensive back. And then junior year came around. The star quarterback had been starting for some years, a guy named, I think, Glenn Cardarelli, I think it was his name. And we had some, playoff teams back then before me. And Coach Massick came up to me and said, "Hey, I want to make you my quarterback. I've seen you play catch, when you throw back the pass that you catch, during drills and stuff." And he thought I was fairly intelligent. And, he was also a history teacher in the school. And I was in his class a couple, at least once. And I had other coaches that were teachers also. And so I guess they had got together and said, "Hey, we want to try to take a long shot and see if we can turn this guy into our quarterback." So during that summer, I went to 2 quarterback camps at colleges, learning how to throw, learning the art of quarterbacking and stuff like that. And then Massick enrolled Don Mervin and all our backs and receivers into a flag football tournament in the spring and summer, after spring ball at Bosco. And it was against all the teams, and we were against the big teams. And we really got our timing down. We got our camaraderie down. We kind of could read each other's minds, and we started trying some of our audibles, right? And Coach Massick, the coaches are not allowed to get close to any of these players, But of course, Coach Massick, he stayed within the rules. But after each game, he would come back and say, "Okay," and they're not even allowed to be there. He said, "What happened? Where'd you do good? What'd you do bad? What'd you learn? What should you have learned?" Just took us through this gauntlet of questions and everything else. And we'd go back. And of course, we surprised everybody and just blew everybody away in that league. And so at the same time, I went from defensive back to starting quarterback with a lot of confidence, right? Because did spring ball, played that flag football league, went to the 2 camps, and I did very well in the camps. I mean, the people that were in the camps sent some notes back to Coach Massick. And so I was pretty confident for a rookie quarterback going into that first game. And why I was really confident was we had a lot of good athletes in the skilled positions, the receivers and the backs. And we were running a highly audibleized veer option running game.
From We Are Marshall, they did that. In We Are Marshall, they talked about the veer because they didn't have the tools, so they were running the veer. So
we ran the veer option. Houston had run it that year to great effect. I think Houston in college. And a couple of other schools were starting to run it. And there were great successes against traditional defenses. And if you had a quarterback and running backs and wide receivers that could almost communicate by osmosis, I mean, I could audible any play in the playbook, right? I
Okay.
could change it from run to pass. I could change it, and everybody knew what to do. And we've been doing this all summer together. So all I had to do is make sure the lineman didn't screw it up. And Rich Ritchie, we had three of the front five were all league. So yeah, we had 2,000. Yeah, you probably read it up. We had 2,000-yard rushers. The two backs were both 1,000+ yards, and I was almost 1,000. I can't remember what it was, but it was. But I made up for a little bit in passing. So we had a really balanced attack, and Coach Masick would really challenge us, and he'd delegate to us, and we earned his trust. And he was a hard taskmaster. I mean, that's a whole other episode on Coach Masick. But but anyway, so we kind of came from 7 and blew to the top right away when all that manifested itself. And so I would say that at Bosco, the brand that we were continuing to build back then was we have good students. They can think. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and back then we weren't as big as they are now, right? We had a weight room. We had a hard weight training program. In fact, the previous coach, Coach Masick, was a bodybuilder. And so we had weights everywhere, and they'd run us through circuits. He was more interested in our physical fitness and our endurance to win the fourth quarter than he was in massing up anybody. So we were all pretty strong, wiry, um, lean guys, and very competitive with each other, and with even more so with any opponent. So I think if I could characterize the ethos of the school, was you're expected to be smart, and you're expected to be a team player. This is all about selflessness. I mean, the Salesians would sacrifice their lives in Africa and South America and stuff. It's not about you, it's about the cause. And we would go to mass we'd put our uniforms on before the games. And some of this transferred into baseball too. We had a great coach there, Tom Gambeau, who coached in the pros. And we had I don't think anybody worked out as hard or ran as many sprints or ran as many grinders or had as many two-a-days within the rules
Right.
as we did. I think we were more fit than anybody else. And then we had an attitude that was an interesting thing. It wasn't a cocky attitude. It was a quiet confidence. And we all would before the game, we were very disciplined. I mean, back then there was hair, 72, we had crew cuts. I mean, buzz cuts. We looked like prisoners, I think that was part of Masick's genius to keep the girls away from us, right? I mean, I could tell you other stories, but anyway, we had shaved heads. The Booster Club, when we were winning a lot of games by big numbers, they wanted to buy us white shoes because we had really traditional uniforms. Coach Masick, no names on these uniforms. You're a team, no, Ohio State Buckeye kind of tabs on your helmet. You're a team. It's more like Penn State kind of thing.
Yeah.
And no white shoes. So yeah, we the Booster Club tried to buy us white shoes because we already had 2,000-yard rushers, and I was pushing 1,000 yards, and I already had a lot of passing records, and so they were going, man, we're getting close to the playoffs. Buy white shoes, and Coach Masick threw a fit. No white shoes for anybody. So it was really team, and that quiet confidence that we had going into the game was part of the Salesian ethos, part of the high expectations and self-discipline and teamwork, and the trust that we all had. We hung together in the off time, we hung together in the on time as a football team, and a lot of us went over to the baseball team afterwards and formed, I think, a nucleus of the baseball team too.
How important was, okay, so I talked to Kevin Lamp, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and Greg Harris,
Mm-hmm.
who played at in the majors. And
Yeah, baseball.
yeah, and one of the things that I started to learn about Long Beach, which I didn't know, most people in LA, here on the East Coast, they'll think, oh, well, LA is, um, it's glitz, it's glamour. So I went to Long Beach and it really opened my
Yeah.
eyes up to what kind of community it was. Now, Bellflower, that there's an edge and it's kind of hardworking areas. Can you talk about Bellflower and did that have anything to do, kind of being from Bellflower? Did that have any, or going to school in Bellflower? Did it have anything to do with
Yeah.
how you played?
Yeah. So Long Beach, now, first of all, we had such great weather year round. You could throw a football all year. We had those flag tournaments and everything else. You could play baseball all year too. So when
Okay.
you weren't, that's one of the reasons I didn't get into basketball, right? Is because during basketball season, since he was switching me from DB defensive back to quarterback, after my junior year, I had a lot of work to do on football. And when there wasn't a league going on, or a touch football league, or a football camp, or anything else, then I was in the weight room, right? And and then similarly in the baseball, I can remember Coach Gamboa in off season where it was legal. We would be hitting birdies. You know what I mean? Birdie, a badminton birdie.
Yeah.
He'd throw them at us and watch our eyes and watch our bat control. You know what I mean? See how quickly you could make a good connection with each and reposition. And so he's looking at hand-eye coordination and bat control. So, I mean, we're doing that. It's not even baseball season. So I mean, there was the weather and the dense competition in the area from the massive population, far more than Boston. I mean,
Oh yeah.
there's houses everywhere, right? And
Sure.
and high schools everywhere. I haven't counted the schools, but when you're in a dense area like that, and there's always a pickup football game at the nearest park, or there's a pickup softball game at the nearest park. We did that too. And I was never home. I was always outside in sports year round.
Mm-hmm.
And so Long Beach was the big city. They had a newspaper, the Long Beach Press Telegram, and they had the big high schools, a lot of the big high schools, right? Bellflower was just another of the many suburbs there. You're right. It was more, if you go to it, you'll see that it's more lower middle class, a lot of sort of commercial industrial area, a lot of hardworking ethic, as opposed to no beaches, as
Right.
opposed to the Long Beach and its beaches, and the glitz of the biggest suburb of Los Angeles called Long Beach. So we had a little bit of an edge. Say, okay, we're going to play a Long Beach school. Okay.
Right.
So we had a little bit of an edge coming from a blue collar kind of school to a beach type of school.
So I read an article and it said, and I'm going to quote this to your point, because you said, switching from defensive back. Um, don't feel like this is your life, but it says, our key man is quarterback Mike Worden. He's the guy who makes the offense go. This is what Coach Masick said. And he said, we changed this year to an option attack because Mike does such a good job. He calls all the plays. He's like a coach on the field. Worden's passing statistics, 109 of 211 for 1437 yards, are impressive. But Masick said Bosco is basically a running team. I hear this, and you know who's coming to my mind is Bill Belichick. This
Yeah,
is what I'm starting to think about.
exactly.
Like, okay,
Exactly. Oh, I made the connection too. Coach Masick, those coaches taught us so much as not only about football, but about life. And they would test you. I see it more clearly now because I've been through a few years, but I remember back then they would single you out, and they knew how to really get you motivated. And they would embarrass people sometimes deliberately to
yeah,
see how they responded to that embarrassment. They would come up with did you let your team down, do you think? Okay,
right.
tell me why you did that. How do you feel? And then talk to somebody else and says, do you think he let you down? You know, and there was peer pressure there too.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a leadership laboratory, I think, and it was a character building category. And Bill Belichick didn't have the greatest athletes all the time, but boy, Do they know the fundamentals? And do they know consistency? And are they smart? You know, that was us. That was us at Air Force too. I mean, we were small, we were slower, we were smaller, but we were smarter than anybody we ever played. So I think there were some parallels there, and Bosco prepared me for that. So I think you're right. I think that the Catholic schools, the academic demands, the expectations of parents, the support of parents, the sort of big family atmosphere, we're all in this together. We're under we're underestimated all the time, and we can show people what true teamwork does, both as a team, as a campus, and as our parent supporting community. I mean, we didn't have teachers union. You know,
Right.
this is all about getting your kids ready for success.
So going back to Bill Belichick, he, obviously his father Steve was at the military academy or at the Navy,
Yep.
and
Yep.
I live about 7 minutes from Foxborough, and
Mhm.
Bill Belichick, every time they interview him, he gives them nothing, right? He's like he mumbles,
Yeah.
and his players are really, if you leave the locker room, because I've seen it, what happens here stays here.
Yep.
And he is very extremely prepared.
Hmm.
His players, a friend of mine or a guy I used to work with played for the Patriots, and he was a big free agent signing, got
Hmm.
millions of dollars. One of the players on the team got hurt, and they wanted him. He was an outside linebacker, and they wanted him to now drop back into coverage to replace someone. Or they brought him in to sack the quarterback, and they dropped him back in the coverage,
Hmm.
and he hated it because
Hmm.
he couldn't be the star because he
Hmm.
couldn't go after the
Hmm.
quarterback. So, because they didn't need that at the time, they had a weak secondary. They needed to make sure that they had coverage and couldn't be exposed. So, long story short, when he got there, Belichick's like, look, I've backed the big Brinks truck up to pay you,
Hmm.
and I really put my neck out there. And he tried to motivate this guy a lot. Um, and to the point where at one point he says to the guy, listen, he benched him. That didn't motivate him. He
Hmm.
said, let's come in and let's start anew. The next, let's get on the same page. And the guy I was working with didn't go in to see him. Um, so he became persona non grata, right, on the team. The team started to phase him out, the other guys on the team,
Yeah.
because he wasn't a character guy, right? And I
Yeah.
asked Andre Tippett, who used to play and is in the Hall of Fame, and I asked Andre
Hmm.
about my friend, and he
Yeah.
said we aren't able to. We don't have. Everybody has to do their job on this team,
Right.
and we're not big enough to have. There's no stars on the team,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I see Belichick, and people were like he's the most prepared, right?
Yep.
There's always preparation, and it's
Right.
like, and you don't see them making stupid mistakes. They never do.
Yes.
So I love that. I just wanted to close the loop on that. Now,
Yeah.
going back to the Air Force, so you go back to the Air Force, and you're playing quarterback, and you went with some famous. Well, I was going to ask you about a couple names. You went to school. Did you? Sully Sullenberger went there, correct?
Yeah. 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 From the United, he was a few years ahead of me. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah. But he wasn't that far ahead of me. Yeah.
okay. And Greg Popovich also
Yeah.
went there.
Yep. Yep.
Um, was there any other players? I was reading that, and then I want to talk about military stuff
Yeah.
too, if we can.
Yeah. Sure.
I was reading that you in your games at Air Force, you had the game against Joe Montana.
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, going into South Bend.
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of an interesting story, because I got recruited there, but I figured, the odds were I'd never play. And it's a good thing I decided that because Joe Montana went there at the same time.
Right, right.
So, so the man upstairs was feeling merciful towards me, but I ended up playing against him. So yeah, I played against Notre Dame each year. And here I am, a little Catholic boy recruited by Ara Parsegian. And I'm a freshman, or I can't remember, freshman or sophomore. I think it was our first game up there. Yeah, we played up there, I think my freshman and my junior year. Anyway, I'm stretching on the sidelines, and, the quarterbacks go out early and work out, and it's the first time in Notre Dame Stadium, which I'd seen before in a recruiting trip. But I'm there wearing a Falcon lightning bolt, and his guys are over there, and we expect them to be bigger. They're bigger. And Ara Parsegian comes over to me, and I can't remember which year it was. I think it was sophomore, but I'm not sure. And he comes up and says, "Hey, Mike, how you doing?" I said, "Coach, I'm doing great." He says, "You like it there?" I said, "Yes, sir, I do." And he says, "You have any regrets?" I said, "No, sir, I don't." And I said, "But I think you're going to try to deal some regrets for me today, So, and he was so kind and so humble and so nice. And every year we went back and played. The last year was, of course, at Air Force, and that's when we were ahead 30-10 with, I think, 4 minutes in the game or 6 minutes in the game or something like that. And they were number one in the nation. They were reigning national champs. They were undefeated. Ara Parsegian's a coach, and Joe Montana's junior and senior years, I think. And anyway, so we ended up losing that game. They got 21 points in the last 4 or 6 minutes of the game, and a couple pass interference calls that I think God was on the wrong side of, but we ended up losing 31-30 to them, and they went on to be national champs, I think. And so, so then my junior year, we were playing at Notre Dame. It was on national TV. It was Thanksgiving-ish time. And again, he came out every year and talked to me while we're working out, and we came into the hotel the day before. Of course, we're in uniform and we're disciplined, and we got to be into bed at 10 and everything else, And they had this big, we were able to turn on the Ara Parsegian show. And so we turned the show on, my roommate and I, and we're listening to them talk about the game, and they just talked me up like I was a Heisman Trophy winner. And I go, this is not going to be good.
No, because they pulled a Lou Holtz on you.
Yeah. So anyway, we got beat by him, and it was a real physical game. And I ran a lot at Air Force. I mean, we didn't run the option, regrettably. We should have run the option. But back then, the coach had been successful in previous Cotton Bowls and stuff, and he didn't want to run the option. So I ended up scrambling quite a bit. And there's this one play where they were like going to flip a coin for me when I dropped back to pass, seeing who was going to tackle me. Then they are all coming, and it was funny. Rich Ritchie was our right guard, from Goretti. He was a starting right guard that senior year, or that year, I think it was a junior. And he just turned over his shoulder and he looked at me with his helmet, because the guy he was playing across from was Mike Fanning, who played for the LA Rams, was a big pro defensive tackle, big guy. Okay. Looked like they painted his head gold. That's how big his face was. It was pouring out of it. And he was eye level. I'm in this, I'm behind the center, and I look at him. He's almost eye to eye with me.
Oh, that's funny.
And Rich just looks over his shoulder. He knows what the play is. It's a drop back pass. And he saw the linebacker lean in to come. And, Rich is a pretty smart guy. He played at Bosco. He just looks over his shoulder and he says, "Watch out, Mike." So when I took the 7-step drop back pass, they had got through. I mean, there's two big Notre Dame guys, just peeling off the blocks and coming for me. And I pump faked up, and they both went up in the air to block the pass. And I ducked, and I went 60 yards up the middle. I got tackled on the 2-yard line. I know I got pushed into the Notre Dame band. And I get up from it, and I'm kind of running back to the huddle, and there's Coach Parsegian violating the rules, runs all the way down to me. And he says, "See, I told you you're as good Yes. They showed on the show. We lost anyway, but it was a great story about there was, and when he recruited, it was kind of a bond from a Catholic, all boys Catholic school to a guy that wasn't Catholic but coached at Notre Dame. There was kind of this synergy we had without even really knowing each other. But yeah, the last game we should have won, and Joe Montana brought him back 21 points last quarter. I probably made the Joe Montana highlight reel, except they would only show my defense, not me. But I got NCAA Player of the Game.
There you go. So you
and but anyway, I couldn't get the lazy boy couch because it was against Air Force regulations.
Oh, I have a funny story about that. But
anyway,
which so okay, so then you're then you go on, and it sounds like your football career at Air Force was really about getting the opportunity to play football, but you
right.
had a bigger calling in your life than football. You had the Air Force
Yeah.
and serving in the Air Force. Now, my dad was in the Air Force,
Yeah.
and he was a cryptographer, and so he says, but
Yeah.
he died. But my dad went on when he was dying. In the later years, we got to know each other. We kind of had a little bit of a weird, kind of a little, a different relationship. And when my dad was dying in his last couple of days, I said to him, I said, "Do you have any regrets in life?" And he said, "Not staying in the Air Force."
Yeah.
That's exactly what he
Yeah.
said.
Well, let me take you back to Bosco too. And this is going to be, guys like Kevin may not understand this. I happen to be a class president too. The worst class president probably in the history of Bosco, because I haven't made one reunion, but most of it's been because I've been either in wars or overseas or doing something, and not in the States, much less
Right.
in California. And so when I went back to be best man in Don Mervin's wedding, he was our all-state wide receiver. He went to USC, and I went back to be the best man in his wedding. That was like, he got married when he was still in SC, so I was still a cadet. I think I might have been a junior, and I went back for the two days at the Air Force Academy and let me go. For a special situation. I went back, it's the first time I saw all those classmates and all those parents. And it had been only 3 years, maybe 2.5 years. And I went back, Andy, there was such a gulf between us. Not that we didn't have good memories, but at the Air Force Academy, it had been so hyper competitive and raising the bar even higher than Massick, that when I went back, I'd already jumped, free falled out of parachutes.
Right.
I'd already soared, gliders.
Yeah, sure.
I'd already flown a prop airplane. I had already gone through a prisoner of war training by the returning POWs from Ho Chi Minh City, and the Vietnam War, and I had been through a lot of trauma and a lot of training, relentless from 5 a.m. till about midnight every day, 7 days a week. So in those 2.5 years, I came back to be the best man, and yeah, I fulfilled the role. But when I got into conversations about how everybody's doing and what's going on, I knew that I was privileged to be leading an accelerated life compared to what had elapsed in the last 2.5 years with my classmates. Even some of the football players who I still loved them, still liked them. They're still buddies, but I knew they seemed so much had happened since I've seen them last that we were way different now. So
there's that that provincialness almost, like
yeah,
I tell my nephew this all the time because he's now going to a school in New York. He left Baltimore where he grew up, and I told him, so you're going to be a renegade? It's going to be filled with bumps and bruises.
yeah.
I'm telling you right now. Don't think it's going to be neatly tied in a bow.
Yeah.
And it's not it's not going to be paved out for you. You could stay at home and you
Yeah.
could stay and
Yeah.
just do whatever. But if you're going to go off on your own, then you need to be prepared
Yeah.
to, um, it's you're going to deal with all kinds of people, and you're going to have your bump. You're going to skin your knee along the way,
Right.
and ultimately you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You
But
hope.
I would say that the foundation at Bosco uh, made me very competitive at Air Force Academy. And then the foundation at the Air Force Academy made me very competitive for being in the Air Force. And
I
then
want.
going into fighters and being among elites and probably the most hyper competitive of all the clans in the Air Force just accelerated uh, the experience and the sort of achievements and the activities that went on. So it all started with the foundation at Bosco. If I'd gone to a public school, who knows where the hell I'd be now.
Well, I was going to ask you. So how do you? So now, because I find this in my own life, right? So in our project, Mike Warren's working with me, who played for John Wooden, and
I know
uh,
Mike Warren, great
he,
guard. I watched him all the time.
he's a wonderful person. Mike Warren is a lovely person
He
who
is.
we've really become pretty tight, and he's
Good.
I respect the hell out of him, and just in the way that he's not only stayed true to himself all these years, and hasn't kind of deviated from his principles to like he's true to himself, and I love that about him, and he's such a special guy, and I find myself being very honored to um, work with a descendant of Coach Wooden.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely. I mean, I watched him play, and he was a leader on that team. I admired him quite a bit. Of course, big fan of Wooden and the UCLA down in LA.
yeah, Mike is terrific, and he's um, I don't know where I was going with that, but what was I going to say? We talk about coaching and foundation, and that's where I think, I think we don't have that today. So I was going to
Yeah.
kind of as much, and I guess my question is how do you turn it off, right? Like, oh, I know what I was going to say. So I become very intense, right? I'm a very intense person, wound very tight in the sense that I have expectations, and I try to. Um, I'm very hard on myself, but I I expect things. Now I don't expect you to be perfect, but I expect you to show up. I expect you to be accountable. I expect you to be honest and truthful, and and share a foxhole with somebody.
Mhm.
Right. For me, that's the kind of relationships I want with people.
Yeah.
How do you take that, right,
Mhm.
from what you learn and all the training, and how do you convert that to a life as a civilian
Mhm.
in in day-to-day life? I mean, do you find yourself like, all right, I got to turn this off because I'm too hard on people, or does that ever come into play?
Yeah, it does. For example, right now I'm going to be president of the Rotary here, right? And so I've been in the Rotary for a few years, and I've been around high achievers my whole life, right? And so I think you have to notch down your expectations, but I think there's still in Rotary, and I'm like the chairman of the board for the golf course out here. I'm involved in a local community, but I think where you connect, the coaches connect with people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good teachers connect with people.
Hmm.
And I learned that when I went back. I was in the Air Force. I went back to coach the quarterbacks at Air Force in '86, and they were one of the best years they ever had. It wasn't because of me, but it was all about connecting. I was brought back basically because I was doing well in the Air Force and I was a grad and I had played quarterback, and they wanted a new assistant coach for quarterbacks, and they were running the option, which I knew in high school, right? So
Okay.
there was some Bosco payout there, and so and I we had a very successful year. We were number 2 in the nation. We just crushed Texas in the some bowl game, and it was 1986, and we had a couple of guys, to your earlier question, who made it in the pros, like Chad Hennings at the Dallas Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
Defensive lineman's got 2 or 3 Super Bowl rings, and And we've got some guys playing today from Air Force. Gardner was I think the center for the 49ers. I think he still is. And there's some other ones out there, a handful, I'll just say at most. Uh, but um, but anyway, so I think you can compartmentalize. What I do is I know one thing when you're a fighter pilot is you really have to be acutely aware of your environment. How many fighters are in the air? Where are they? Where are they turning? Who can bring a missile to bear on me? Who can't? Or if there's surface air missiles on the ground, where are they located? Where are they serving? What is their radar frequency? That is a search radar, and when it turns to lock you up and fire a guided missile at you, what's the PRF or the pulse recurrence frequency shift to, and you train your ears. And so you have to kind of know your environment to be successful. And I think you have to compartmentalize too, right? So I'll just take a nonprofit like Rotary, right? So these people come from all different parts. And so but I still think you can inspire them to a level they think would be a lot, and you may not think is that much.
Right.
Their
Right.
experience. So you acutely sense your environment. And like when I went to the city of Seattle to fix their traffic problem, it was a totally different culture than what I'd been used to. So you really kind of have to, I think, tune in, listen, seek to understand before being understood, ask the right questions in the right way. And then once you have a sense of that environment, then you can reach back to your leadership toolkit. And one thing I noticed from Bosco, Air Force Academy, Air Force, all the way up, was to be a servant leader, to have humility. And one quick story: the Air Force, when I first went to the weapons school, Navy Top Gun school, and then Air Force weapons school, those Vietnam veterans would just beat the hell out of me in the air in dogfights, and they were ruthless, and they were profane, hard drinkers, from the bitterness of the war, etc. But boy, did they make me good. I mean, they were so demanding. And when I got to be in charge of all that, many years later as a general officer, and I became the commander of the Air Force Warfare Center, in charge of all Air Force warfare training, we changed that weapons school from beat the hell out of you because you'll never be as good as me, that's what I remembered, to humble, approachable, credible. That is, if you're going to be the best F-15 pilot in the world, you've got to be humble. You've got to be approachable by the most, because I was scared as a captain of those majors that were weapons school team
Right.
instructors. Humble, approachable, and credible. You had to damn well know that airplane, and you had to know it better than anybody else. So it's an attitude shift, right? And I think servant leaders do that. They have a humility about them, and they have an ability to connect with people and to find a way to tune into their frequency and to inspire them to achieve more than they would have otherwise. And that's the definition of leadership.
You know what? I think that's something that working for people. Now I'm doing my own thing, but working for people, the leaders who I felt like had the emotional. You gotta go. You still there?
I'm sorry, say
Oh,
again, Andrew.
the leaders that had an emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
an intellectual, emotional, being understanding people, and
Mm-hmm.
being able to, not make it about them, but
Yeah.
I want to make it. I want you to have the best experience
Right.
possible, and I'm going to lead by example rather
Right.
than talk about my
Yes.
bonus or
Right.
stuff. And then you find, like, and to your point about um, the guys who were like really hard on you, it's that's almost like growing up in a situation where you kind of, had big brothers or whatever, and they beat you up, and then it's like, I don't want other people to go through that.
Yeah.
But
Right.
so I know the other side of the equation.
Right. Right.
So I had a couple more questions for you, and I appreciate you So what do you think? Okay, so you're a student of
Right.
military history.
Right.
Um, do you see that translate? I mean, we kind of touched on it, but do you see the correlation between football and military history? Is there,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I think one of the tying things is the word combat, right? And training, right? So um, you train very hard to understand your opposing team, baseball, football, athletics, right? And it's like you said, Belichick is probably the gets his team better prepared to play than any other coach in the NFL. So the more, success is 99% uh, preparation, right? Most of that is perspiration. So you just out train everybody. For example, in the Air Force, we train harder than anybody can imagine. And then, flying over Desert Storm the first night, when you're seeing all this stuff on CNN and stuff going up in the sky and stuff, it was easier than our red flags back in Nellis, Nevada, or Las Vegas, Nevada, in the Nevada desert, because you out train any games experience you're going to be in. Your practices are harder than your games,
right,
So,
right.
so I think part of that is learned in history, right? We studied military history at the academy, and then I was fortunate enough to get a graduate work in it, and then I used it later on throughout my career, even when I came back and coached back at the academy. And that is that you really out prepare everybody. You think of the contingencies and how you would react to each contingency. You almost over plan, and you just out prepare for everybody else to play it. And there's numerous examples in history of how that came to bear. Right. I don't want to take you down them, but planning is a big thing. And then people are people, whether they're in a football game, a baseball game, anything competitive, like they're trying to win something.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is um, they're they got butterflies, adrenaline's pumping. There's a climate of fear and danger, right? There's uncertainty about what the outcome would be. They know they're an eyelash away from maybe losing their lives. And so human beings that perform under that kind of pressure and that kind of danger and that kind of chaos and confusion, it is the cool headed team that is trained in very rigorous environments that functions better. And when things break up, as they inevitably do, into smaller pieces or smaller units or smaller brigades, battalions, armies, whatever, um, they pick up because they know the commander's intent, and they get back on course and they fall back in line and they continue the push or the second echelon push or whatever the intent of the operation is. So that's training, that's functioning under pressure, and sounds a lot like I'll just take it a high school football game. You prepare, there's going to be times when you just fumbled, but you forget about it, you learn from it, and you move ahead, and you don't blame each other as losing armies do and everything
Mm-hmm.
else. So there's so much in any human team competition to include warfare. And so preparing, anticipating what they'll do, uh, uh, accelerating your decision cycle faster than they can react, that's all part of warfare and all part of competition.
Awesome. Okay. Now, my last two questions. Rich Ritchie,
Mm-hmm.
um, fast forward, this was when he died. That was 70.
73 or 4. No,
Okay.
yeah. No. 77 or 8.
How has that? I'm I'm guessing. Do you think about him every day, or do you think about him a lot? And how has that kept your life? You know, does that keep you? Is that like a grounding thing in your life to always kind of remember that relationship?
Yeah, no, I have it. Those are the formative years, right? And when you're going through high school, you're trying to figure out who you're going to be, what kind of character be high school, and now it's high school and college. And so those are your formative years that develop your character, right? And your attitude, etc. So I think that unfortunately, Rich has been followed by a lot of other names in my life, in my careers of other people
Sure.
that have whose death I've witnessed. So, but because it occurred during my formative years, it probably is more memorable than say numerous, unfortunately, numerous times in different conflicts, or different training accidents, or different funerals, or uh, etc. So, um,
But he's with you.
oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, we're going through the same formative process, very close. And his wife ended up marrying another academy grad a couple years behind me, and so we know where they are and everything else like that. But yeah, formative years at Bosco carved out the beginnings of what those character and principled behavior, and I'll say personalities and attitudes were going to be. And that school gave us a jump. And now they're in a competitive rivalry with Mater Dei. So that's just going to hone the sharpening the saw even more.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Now,
I mean, if they didn't have a Mater Dei, they wouldn't be nearly as good as they are, and Mater Dei wouldn't be nearly as good as they are. It's kind of like Alabama and Clemson, right? I mean, it's in football, at least it's those hyper competitions that really make world breaking performances, and so I'm really glad the best thing that ever happened to Bosco was Mater Dei, and the best thing that ever happened to Mater Dei was Bosco.
boom. That's great. And then the last thing is, we're doing something about LA being the greatest sports town in America. And like we were talking about, Seattle is actually a place we were talking about doing next because I
Yeah,
think to your point, you made a really good, some really good points, and we talked about it
yeah.
as a group, thinking it could be really good. Now, my question to you is, what do you think about LA as a sports town from when you grew up to today? Have you seen a change? Do you stay active in it? Do you pay attention to what's going on? Are you a Dodger fan?
Yeah,
What?
yeah. I think that honestly, I can't speak to it as deeply as when I was there, right? Because everybody wanted to go to a Dodger game, everybody wanted to go to an Angel game, everybody wanted to go to a Laker game, and they had some great teams back then, and the Rams were there, remember, and the fearsome foursome, and all that. So, and then UCLA was dominating college hoops, and USC was right at the top of football. So when I was there, it was hyper national excellence, right? In all sports, all professional sports, and all college sports too. I mean, you go back in the record and just think of the 70s back there. What was, who was on top in all those competitions or all those leagues? So I stepped into a slice of history that was motivating. Gosh, for those years, all those high schools, this trickled down.
Right.
Everybody had the T-shirts, and and it was competitive. Some people were Dodgers fans, some people were Angels fans, and they were giving each other the Washington State versus the UW sort of divide, and it was the same thing UCLA and USC. I mean, half my high school went to UCLA. They almost got the whole team almost. A lot of them went there, and and Don went to USC, and but that sort of family neighborhood rivalry, Hatfields and McCoys, were set up at the college level, and were set up at the professional level too. So it just accelerated in my mind the interest and the active participation in a populace trickling down to us little old high schoolers and junior high schoolers. So leagues, flag football leagues, softball leagues, baseball leagues, clinics everywhere. I don't know. My short answer is I don't know if it was just a slice of history when I was there, and if it faded since then, when NFL titles drifted elsewhere, or NCAA titles drifted elsewhere, or whatever. So I don't know. I just haven't said, but all I can speak to is the 6 years I was there. It was a good time. I mean, it was being there at the right time in the right place in the right environment, and I got launched from that.